Hey there, it's Dan and you're watching the Salty Sea. With the Grand Alliance books out and adding a whole bunch of new leaders and big heavy units into the game, it's finally time to wrap up my championship belt series, this time with the heavyweight division. We're looking for who is the heavyweight champion of the 8 points, and I'm just going to go over the rules real quick. Now it's held in the 8 points, so as always we're looking for the top 8 units. This time everything over by any amount, 180 points. So I evaluate heavyweights a little differently than I do with the cheaper units. One of the biggest roles, because so many warbands have just tons of little guys running around everywhere, one of the biggest roles of your big ones is to actually kill those little guys efficiently. So the number one thing I look for is being able to do 8 damage or more to a toughness 3 model. That's sort of like the first hurdle that I look at when I'm looking at a big unit over 180. Because as I said, the game's dominated by them, and being able to take them out is important. Point for point damage efficiency is still important. So if you do, say, 13 damage to toughness 4, that's still pretty amazing. But the first hurdle is the most important, getting to 8 against T3. After that, I mostly look for the abilities, mobility, durability, and abilities. So I'm looking at something that clears the first hurdle of damage and then adds something else to the table in a really major way, whether it's just really fast, really hard to kill, or just does something on the board with the dice abilities that is just really hard for your opponent to account for. The Grand Alliance books added a whole bunch of these units to the game, and they also did some points changes as well. So sorry for the Shrike Talon. That's the Corvus Cabal big guy. It was 185 points. It was on my short list to end up in the countdown of this video until it actually went down to 175, making it really a steal at that price. One of the better units that would have been in the middleweight division if it had actually been there when I did the video. I'm also going to avoid monsters in this because they're not allowed for matched play according to the books, and a lot of them are sort of pointed kind of oddly aggressively for what they're doing. I'm just going to leave them out of this. I also just want to warn you that ramping cheating is going to occur. Unlike the middleweight division, there are a ton of excellent units in this weight class. I went through all 4 Grand Alliance books and counted something like 48 awesome units that I thought were worth talking about. That's a ridiculous number, so sticking to 8 is just impossible. So a lot like the featherweight video, I'm going to cheat where possible. In the middleweight division, I really only saw maybe 15 units that were really worth it. But a little bit like that video, a lot of the best units in the heavyweight division seem to be working along similar lines. So I'm going to sneak in mentions what I can and put them in categories when I can. But that's still going to leave some things on the outside looking in. For example, the Ossiarch Bone Reapers have the Stalker with 2 greatswords, which is an amazing fighter that doesn't get talked about because the support pieces in the warband are so bad. It's still not quite good enough for this list though, so this is the last time I'm going to mention it. So now we get into the honorable mentions. That's how we're going to start. And I want to start with the War Chanter. The War Chanter is sort of the banner carrier for a large group of area control mages that have sort of been added to the game with the Grand Alliance books. There were a few out there before, but now there's a whole bunch. Now, most mages are still terrible in this game. They're expensive, they don't do any damage, and most of them have bad direct damage abilities. Some, though, have really strong AoE buffs and debuffs or movement threats. So the War Chanter is the best of these, but there's a pretty long list of playable ones now, between the Wurgog Prophet and the Great Bray Shaman and the Slaughter Priest and the Lord Castellant. It's just a great list, and I'm glad they added them to the game. Now, Unlike the rest of the types of units that you'll see in this video, these are mostly reliant on what the rest of their team is capable of when the spell is active or when it's in threat range. So I'm sort of demeriting them for needing an assist in that way. Now, if someone in the future points out a really broken team using one of these, then, you know, I would bump it up if I did this again in a year. Some of the things like maybe War Chanters and Wargog Prophets and Gloomspite Gits as allies, or maybe a Lord Castellan and Ideneth or Daughters of Cain might be interesting, but we'll see. Also, not over 180 points, but the Slaanesh Shard Speaker and Infernal Enraptress are really interesting allies in Chaos, especially for Skaven. Then we get to the Wrathmaster. This guy's the poster boy for the board controllers. It's a group of units that can spend turn one just getting to a spot. Then for the rest of the game, they stand there, and because they have range 2, they just get to say anyone who enters this huge pie plate radius just gets a face full of smash. I think that the Grand Alliance books might have made this less valuable going forward, but I could be wrong here. So I definitely had, I think I had the Wrathmaster at number 7 at one point, but then the more I looked, the more I saw factions that never had anything that could tangle with a Wrathmaster have something that could go one-on-one with it. And so the ability to sort of put that huge radius down on an objective is a little bit less valuable if your opponent can actually just bring something in to solo fight your board controller. So a lot of these range 2 super heavies are a little less scary than they were before, though I do think the Wrathmaster, the Kurnoth Huntmaster, and the new Lord of Pain, those 3, are all going to stay relevant and good. Even if some of the board controllers, like, say, the Saurus Guard Leader, or the Evocator Prime with Staff, or the new Scions of the Flame guy, kind of fall by the wayside. I also almost put the Blissful one, the Glass Cannon out of Unmade, on this list. It's amazing. It slices, it dices, it makes julienne fries out of your opponents. Just don't let them hit you, or you'll have a bad time. It's a huge glass cannon, and the only reason it's good is because every ability in the Unmade is geared towards enabling it and helping your other fighters help it out. And so while my featherweight and middleweight lists had a lot of glass cannons, having an expensive glass cannon is a bit dangerous, just because if a cheap glass cannon, it either dies quickly or it hits way above its weight class. An expensive one, if it dies, you just insta-lose. Lastly, last honorable mention, then I get to the main list, I promise, is the Mindstealer Spheranx. I just want to shout out the Warcry specific allies that came out with the game. 2 of the 3 are really good, and they can ally into any Chaos Warband. Before the Grand Alliance books came out, a lot of factions were missing a heavy hitter, and these were awesome in that role. But now, almost every faction has something like it. The only thing is that as more elites go into the game, it's possible the Spheranx in particular gets better over time because it matches up so well against other heavyweights with the plethora of abilities and lockdown control that it has. So let's get into the main list, shall we? So we're going to start off at number 8 with the Sylvaneth Arch Revenant. And right away I'm cheating terribly because I told you that I forced everything to clear the hurdle of being able to one-shot kill a chaff unit, and the Arch Revenant struggles to do that. It does it around 40% of the time, not often. It averages, I think, 7.5, 7 1/3 damage against toughness 3. Even the tank score isn't that great. Normally I say that a damage efficiency or a tank score over 6 makes it really good, but neither of those are here. So what gives? First, it just has a ton of utility. It has flying and 10-inch move, which is already great, but it's got range 2 as well. So you can fly anywhere on the board and then stab something without it being able to hit you back efficiently. There's a few units in the game like this. The Kharadron Overlord's Skywarden Custodian is a really good example of a similar unit to the Arch Revenant. But what makes the Arch Revenant worthy of this list is actually the AoE buff that it has. In any situations where you aren't forced to go and try to solo something with this thing, you can use the triple to pick any spot on the battlefield because of your incredible mobility, and just juice your whole team around that spot. So any mission with multiple objectives, the Arch-Revenant is a hugely important overperformer because you can start out on one objective, pop the ability to help your fighters there, and then go to a whole nother objective to turn the tide of battle over there. So it really runs circles around a lot of the units in this video, and that might get more important with the new edition. Again, if there's more elites, then it's possible that being able to one-shot kill chaff becomes a little less important, although I doubt it'll change that much. But in the meantime, this is still amazing, and all of the AoE buff mages that I talked about in the honorable mentions, this sort of combines those with the fighting units and their abilities. And so next we get into a real fighter, and that's the Doombull. The Doombull stands in here as one of the best of the big beefers. These giant melee infantry bruisers. No tricks, nothing weird, just beef. A ton of units fall into this category of heavy units that are really hard to kill and just do a bunch of damage. Some are pretty good, like Chaos Chosen, Korgorath, Gore Chopper Brutes, a couple Stormcast Foot Heroes, and most of them are pretty bad. Like the Ogre Breacher or the Nurgle Leader, or, well, most of the Stormcast Foot Heroes. But the Doombull is one of the best of them. A big part of the reason is because it has move 5 instead of the standard move 4. But it still has these combat stats like the move 4 ones. It has ludicrous damage output, incredible durability. Whatever your opponent puts in front of your Doombull, it's probably going to lose. This thing is just so good in a fight. Also, consider pairing the Doombull with a tricksy leader, like the Great Bray Shaman, to make it harder for your opponents to play around the combat stats. It's already harder than most of its brethren at move 4, but the Great Bray Shaman can make a great combo here. So then next we get into the Thunderfist, and I'm just cheating even more here because I want to talk about all the ogres. I easily could have had the first 3 of this unit, or of this list, all be ogres, because the ogre leaders are just incredible. The Thunderfist, though, is the best of them all. And so rather than go into each of the leaders, I just want to really focus on that one. The key here is Might Makes Right, which is their bonus move attack action after a kill that all the ogre leaders get. A lot of warbands have this. Some of them are on a triple instead of a double, which isn't nearly as good, but all the leaders in this like it, and most of the warbands that have it are on melee leaders as well. But I think it's a little overrated on melee leaders. On a ranged monster, though, it gets really incredible, especially if you're a threat to one-hit kill something. Now, the average attack on this is 7.33, but you're getting 6s and 9s at roughly equal rates, which means 2 attacks almost assuredly is going to give you a kill, which lets you get a double, an attack again, which is often going to get you another kill. You can kill 2 chaff units with a Thunderfist at a pretty decent average, sometimes 3. So it's just an incredible way, an incredibly efficient way to just mow down anyone who's doing sort of the main meta thing of just flooding the board with as many units as they can. So let's talk about building with it, right? Because the new Grand Alliance books, they let you put 2 leaders in there. So you can use 2 Thunderfists, a Club Glutton, and a bunch of Noblars. The Discord user Sailor was talking about this list on the Warcry Discord, where you can just use your wild dice to get 2 doubles every round. It's actually pretty easy to roll that way. And so now your Thunderfists are just mowing down 4 or 5 chaff units every round. And so your opponent who's doing the main meta thing, their activation advantage is just going to disappear really quickly. Maybe by the end of round 2, all their little guys are gone. So this is going to be an awesome list for a lot of metas, and probably the best warband in the game at just taking down chaff quickly. But don't forget, the Thunderfist has access to a quad called Thunderous Blast of Hot Metal, and it just puts a ton of damage onto just one shot, or one set of shots. So it does make them a really good threat to elite units as well. And then just want to mention the Tyrant. I could have potentially replaced the Doombull with this thing. It just has incredible combat stats, and it also has a ranged attack too, for when you face warbands that can dance around the big beefers. Whether you think that's worth the extra movement on the Doombull is up to you, but they're both pretty legit. At number 5, we've got more cheating, and that's because I want to go into the dragons. This is the one category where I really couldn't just pick one to be the poster child. And so, while there are dozens, there are really 4 that are head and shoulders above the rest. All 4 of these are amazing, and you could argue that any one of them should be much higher on this list. But I did dock them a little bit of points just because they're so similar in the way they're statted and in the roles they play, and with how many other units are trying to do the same thing. So let's describe what they are, though. There's 2 leaders, the Crypt Infernal and the Squig Hopper Boss. And then there's 2 troops, the Vargeist and specifically the Stormcast Prosecutor with Grand Blade. Most prosecutors are bad, just to note, but this one with the Grand Blade is really good. The 2 death ones are a little harder to kill, and I think they're just a hair better overall, but it's still so close. I only like them more because they do still enough damage. They clear that one-shot killing chaff units hurdle, but they're just harder to deal with, harder to take down for their points. Whereas the Prosecutor, sometimes against the wrong opponent, can get shot out of the sky. But all of these are still incredible for fighting. Again, all of them have at least one of their fighty stats above 6, which is, a good rule of thumb to look for. In the Doombull section, I talked a little bit about how it just wins its fights, right? These dragons aren't quite as good at fighting as the beefers are, but they can still win almost any fight they pick, and they get to decide when and where it actually happens. This is a game of objectives, remember, so that's actually really important. These dragons are so good that, even the lower tier ones, like the Ripperdactyl Chief, are still great units. Really the only thing holding them back in my mind is just that there's so many of them. But the 4 I picked are definitely the cream of the crop. A crop that includes like 20 units, some of which don't fly, but move just as fast because they're mounted. Things like the Bone Splitter's Boar Maniac, the Khorne Skullmaster, those are great units too, but they're sort of a tier below because the mount keyword is such a big drawback, not being able to use terrain. So now we get into the top 4, the absolute cream of what it looks like to be a big unit in Warcry. And the first one is going to be the Contorted Epitome. It is an absolutely suffocating control piece that came out with the new Grand Alliance books. Now, the actual fighting stats aren't anywhere as good as a lot of the units on this list, but you're not taking it for the stats. So the fact that it can still move 10 inches and still hit one-shot kill a chaff unit is just gravy. It really does do an average of 8 damage to toughness 3, and with those 6 attacks, your fail rate is just really, really low. And by the way, how does it move so fast? It's 2 demonettes holding up a huge mirror, and they're only held up by, 2 metal chains? I don't get it, but I'm not complaining. So let's look at the ability, because that's what makes this so good. On a triple, it's got 9-inch range, and you just get to blank a unit for this round. No activations whatsoever. They don't get to use abilities, they don't get to use a range shot, they can't fight whatever they're touching. It's really scary, and it's just incredible because it opens up a whole new playstyle for Warcry, which is just true control. Your opponent just gets a ton of pressure on them to go first, or else you can just lock down their best unit. So now they're using up wild dice to try to win instead of trying to win priority instead of getting better abilities that will affect the game more. And even if they do take first, you still just get this 10-inch movement, which you can use to go somewhere else and lock down whatever their best unit they didn't go first with is. So the mobility here just piles on in a really effective way. And also remember the 9-inch range to the ability means that you don't really have to be sacrificing this thing's activations either to make it work. You can zap in with your mirror, lock down their best thing, and still have an activation to use fighting a chaff unit that you zapped in near. So that might make this the best triple in the game. I'm not sure. Time and more playing will tell. But rest assured, I'm painting my own up very soon. In the meantime, you get to look at a beautiful example of it by another YouTuber named Vince Venturella, who chances are, if you play Warcry, you know about him. So let's get into how you would actually build around this. I personally would go with the Epitome, 2 Fiends, and 6 Demonettes. Fiends took the number 2 spot in my top middleweights list, and the one thing Slaanesh was sort of always wanting was a better leader to pair with this exact core. The Hell Reaver is fine, but an unexciting, sort of big mounted fighter. And the Blissbringer is great, but it's very points inefficient. It doesn't add up anywhere near 1,000, and it's not really pointed like a big, heavy unit. So the Epitome just completely transforms how this already solid list functions. Fiends were already control pieces, so having a control lord to lead the warband gives the whole thing a real identity. And now there's just nowhere your opponent can escape from your disruption. Because the Contorted Epitome is running everywhere, but the Fiends can also go anywhere locking something down too. And all this just lets your Demonettes focus on what they do best, which is just chopping stuff up. Threat assessment is going to be key here, like with any control strategy and other strategy games like Magic. If you pick the wrong things to lock down, the wrong stuff to take out, your Epitome will get killed, your Demonettes will get killed, all your fragile units will die, and you'll lose. So protect your foot ladies. They're super pinchy, they're your only offense with this list, and so make sure that you lock down the right things with your control pieces. I might honestly regret not putting the Epitome number 1 in a few months or so. For now, I think the one thing holding it back is its durability. Most warbands can't do this, but a half dozen or so warbands have fast-moving, high-damage chaff that can sort of pull this down in time to free their elite beater from its clutches. Though I might think that point is silly one day. Maybe forcing the opponent to fully commit to one unit, especially such a mobile unit, means you end up winning the game anyway against, say, Corvus Cabal or Seraphon, which are warbands that could kill this pretty efficiently. Can't wait for time to teach me which way is right. Now we've got the Bloodwrack Medusa, which is a little like a Contorted Epitome that fights. It moves 7 inches, which is not quite as much as the 10, but deals more damage and is much harder to take down. It's also got the range 2, which lets you, as a fighter, keep things at arm's reach while laying the beats into them. Now let's go into the ability a little bit. This one gives you an 88% chance, so good enough to rely on, I would say, to just cut off all moves and disengages for a nearby unit. A lot of things have this on, say, I think it's either a 2/3 chance or an 83% chance. So the Bloodwrack Medusa having it at a higher percentage is really nice. It also gets to do damage while it does it, which is just really devastating for your opponent as well. Now, it does it for just close by units at the range of the dice value, but with the 2-inch range for its attacks, that's great synergy because you can still set up outside of where they can fight, lock them down so they can't move to actually come get you, and then just keep wailing on them while they're totally helpless to it. So it's a little bit more of a proactive control strategy than the Contorted Epitome, which I often like better. But really time will tell which one is more effective. I do think for now, though, that the Bloodwrack Medusa is absolutely one of the most terrifying units in the game. Another new addition from the Grand Alliance books, by the way. Now, for building around it, I think it depends what you pair it with, but I think my first guess would be with a Slaughter Queen, and I'd want to make a sort of high numbers warband, so I would just do the Bloodwrack Medusa and the Slaughter Queen, which is a sort of foot hero for Daughters of Cain that just does a ton of damage, along with 3 Witch Elves and 5 Sisters of Slaughter with Whip and Knife. Those were in my top 8 cheap units video. They are an incredible unit that is able to sort of dance around other units with their range 2, which just gives this warband an obscene damage output, good mobility, numbers, with lots of range 2 to sort of frustrate your opponents and make it hard for them to fight back, which also really counteracts what would be a glass cannon problem, except that they get to be proactive in every situation. And with numbers like this, with 10 units, you also don't let your opponent really surround you very easily. So this unit's going to be in this sort of, despite having a control disruption strategy, you're still going to be proactive and in the driver's seat all the time. If you come from Magic, this is a little like a Delver deck, but in Warcry. So finally we get into the very tops, and it's the Rat Ogre, which was absolutely the dominant force of Warcry 1.0. Now when I say that the Rat Ogre was the dominant piece in Warcry 1, I think that because the sculpt is so ugly, I think not that many people have them, and so not everyone got to play against it. So let me just explain a little bit why it's so crazy. Remember when I put the Doombull at 7 and said it was sort of the standard bearer for every terrifying foot monster? Well, I didn't include this guy as a part of it because, point for point, the damage is just so much higher than every other ground-pounding beatstick out there. So 9.2 for damage efficiency in terms of point for point is just incredible. And it's not exactly easy to kill either. 6.9 tank score, dealing 30 damage. Not very many warbands can do that before this has just ripped apart whatever was coming after it. He's even got the extra inch of movement that I said made the Doombull so much better than all the other huge beatsticks. So it's just an incredible damage output. And it also comes along with an ability that lets you, with the Packmaster, actually give it bonus attacks as if you needed it. Just don't try to rely on it because you really don't need to. This thing with Onslaught active, it's not crazy to see it just throwing 20 damage around and just one-shot killing not just chaff units, but elite units in its own right. So, as I said before, I've been focusing on these control ladies. Until we see something be able to deal with Rat Ogre Skaven, I do think it's still maybe the best list in the game. So let's talk a little about how you build around a Rat Ogre. You don't have to take my word for it. People have just been sort of 1 or 2 units different from this consensus list for a while now on various nerd corners of Warcry. So if you don't frequent those seedy hives of villainy on the internet, then here's kind of my version of what the list looks like, the horrible Skaven list of Pestilence Molder. You're going to start with a Bringer of the Word, which is the Plague Monk leader. And he's got this awesome ability to sort of retreat and attack or get bonus disengages off your opponent to then just go and fight something else, which just makes it impossible to nail down. Then you have the Rat Ogre, which just spits out ridiculous amount of damage. And then 5 Giant Rats, a Packmaster to double up your Rat Ogre attacks, and then 2 Plague Monks. All of these are just incredible units. Every single thing brings something powerful to the table, and the damage, I know I just said the Daughters of Cain warband back there had an obscene amount of damage, but this is the real obscene damage thing. Giant Rats and Plague Monks both have incredible damage efficiency. And the Plague Monks have the ability to sort of outplay opponents with the range 2 and their bonus disengage ability. Overall, this is the one that strikes the most fear into the hearts of sort of Warcry metagamers, even if that shouldn't be a thing. And until we see otherwise, I would keep it here for now. So if that's sort of the best list and the scariest unit in the best list, why isn't it number 1? Well, maybe I'm just being a total cheater, even to the very end, but I really do think that the Gorehound is an incredible unit here, and there have been some changes to it. The Grand Alliance books changed a bunch of things, but the first thing that blew my mind the most was what they did to the Gorehound. First, they committed a horrible crime by taking away its leader mark, but then they made up for it by giving it a 35 points drop, which is an insane amount of value for a unit that was already a fine deal point for point before. So even though I don't believe them that a dog isn't allowed to be in charge, it's maybe a worthy trade. Point for point, this thing fights as well as all of the slow-moving beatsticks, the Tyrant, the Doombull, etc. Seriously, compare these combat stats to all the dragons that I put at number 5. These are better, much better, and you're paying 25 fewer points for them. Now, I know what you might be saying. They fly. 10-inch move is a lot more than 8. I only talk in grumpy voice. But listen, hold on. Fake straw person I use as a rhetorical device. Hungry for Flesh is an awesome mobility ability that can really make up for lack of flying, in my opinion. So what it is for just a double, Gorehounds can get an extra move as long as they end up closer to the closest visible unit than they started, if that unit was within 6. So there are a ton of ways you can abuse this. I already broke it down in my middleweight video, and this one's getting a little long as is. So you can go over and take a look at that one if you really want to deep dive into it. See, Icefall Yetis have this ability too, and they're just as fast. They can't quite one-shot a chaff unit though, like the Gorehound can, so they're excluded from the list. I would have happily given them an honorable mention, but it would have risked ruining the surprise of putting Gorehound number 1. Slaanesh has the ability too, but on a triple, which isn't nearly as good. Now, they move, they fight. I also want to just mention their quad ability, Burning Roar. There's a ton of ranged damage burn spells in this game. Most are horrible. This one isn't. You can often do 4, 6, or 8 damage with Burning Roar, which is hugely impactful in all of the Hunter-Killer missions. So it's not usually as good as Rampage, but it sometimes is, and the times where it is, it's winning you the game by the way that it's more useful than Rampage in this moment. Hunter-Killer missions often come down to one player body blocking the way through to their important unit, and Burning Roar stops them from being able to do that. You just run up to their chaff wall, kill a unit with the awesome stat or attack line that the Gorehound has, and then still put a ton of damage into your target. So I do also want to just address the fact that this is probably a pretty surprise choice, because I think a lot of people will disagree with this, because the Gorehound doesn't really have nearly the reputation it deserves, and it might still not even after this video, as people play more and more with the new rules. Now, part of why it didn't have the reputation before is it was 35 points more expensive before. But the other part is that the rest of the warband is not in a great place. And the Gorehound is absolutely the best player on a bad team. In fact, the Grand Alliance books came out, and Demons of Khorne were the only warband with no leader abilities other than sort of the original Warcry warbands. So it's sort of in a totally different category than everything else, because at least those Warcry warbands are all sort of created for a unique playstyle that all kind of works in one synergistic package, or at least the good ones are. Corvus, Splintered Fang, Cypher Lords, they're sort of created all with one purpose. Demons of Khorne really weren't. So not having the extra leader abilities really hurts them. So, you can make pretty competitive Demons of Khorne lists, but man, is the Gorehound having to do a lot of work on its own. So here's two good faith efforts at doing so. The first is a double Gorehound list using a Blood Reaper as the leader. Blood Reapers are not very good, but the warband is solid. You know, Blood Letters are very high damage, and the Gorehounds, having two of them, it's going to do a ton of work here. I'm only just nitpicking because I really do think the Gorehound is the best heavy in the game, and it just won't be in a top 5 warband to be able to prove it. The Blood Reaper being attacks, just bringing very little to the table compared to, say, the Skaven leaders in the last list I showed do. And then the Blood Letters, while they are really high damage, are really slow. They're serviceable, and there are some warbands that would kill to have them as a chaff unit, but they aren't in the, say, top 15 or so cheap units. Can I get a unit that does good work outside of the Gorehound in this warband? Well, you can. It's the Skullmaster, and it is actually pretty good. At 265 points, it's an absolute tank, and it does have enough damage to one-shot kill chaff units. Moves 6 inches, toughness 5, 38 hit points, which just makes it impossibly hard to kill sometimes for some warbands. It's actually just one of the dozens of really good heavyweight units that just weren't quite there to make the cut. The trick is, points start disappearing pretty fast when you put one in your team. So here I have one, and then instead of being able to do 2 Gorehounds, I have a Fleshhound instead, which is still an excellent unit. And then I'm down to 5 Blood Letters. So this is also a great warband, but 8 is pretty low numbers. Still going to beat most warbands that you sort of slap together, almost all of them, but still just not cracking the top 4 or 5 lists that you can get in the game. So the Gorehound, incredible unit, one of the very best units in the game, just kind of lifting a mid-tier warband into sort of the top of tier 2, as you would. All right, so there you have it. The Heavyweight Championship edition of Warcry's championship belt. It's been a hell of a journey. 3 videos requiring me to research nearly every single unit in the whole game. I'm so glad I waited until the Grand Alliance books came out for this last one. Even though it took a lot of research, I think it was worth it, and I'm so glad and impressed to see all of the new sort of exciting units that came out with these 4 books. I am going to be adding more Warcry content soon here. Whether it's before or after Christmas break, I don't know. But, I'm excited to, now that I've been looking at some of the sort of spikiest, most competitively intense units, I want to do some stuff that highlights some of the cool jank that's in the game, because there really is a lot of stuff that you can build around to just have a silly and fun time, and I can't wait to show you guys that. So, until that time, may all your rolls be crits.